we've got the unfun stuff out of the way, or some of the less fun stuff out of the way. So let's talk new products. We did have 2 new products in the weed guide this fall. No new herbicides, just new combinations. The first one on my list here is a product called Storin. That's a Syngenta product. It's basically Acheron minus atrazine plus Zidua. Okay. So it's dual Zidua, Callisto, and then this biocyclopyrone, which is not anything that we use by itself. So it's 2 bleaching herbicides, those group 27 herbicides, and 2 group 15 herbicides. Okay. Syngenta has basically positioned this product as, if you see Acheron starting to slip, they want to bump you up to this. That's kind of how Syngenta's positioning this in the marketplace. These data are from my plots at Ashland Bottoms last summer of 23. So you can see, well, let's slide that little thing around so you can actually see. There we go. So here's the 2 Storin treatments. For what we had, the 3 quarts of Resicor plus 3/4 of a pound of atrazine was the best treatment. But all of these were greater than 90% for the most part. Okay, so not a game changer necessarily, but it is a good option to consider. The other thing to note, okay, it does not have atrazine. Okay, remember the last slide that I showed you guys was reductions in our ability to use atrazine. This is, Syngenta is the primary registrant for atrazine, okay? They're making this decision to try to allow more flexibility for atrazine requirements. Okay, so one of the things we're gonna see with labels coming out are more, I'll say site specific, but field specific requirements for herbicides that can get into the water supply. Okay, so this is giving us more flexibility to hit the right atrazine rate and timing for each individual field. Okay.
What's that one over there at the far right, 32
Maverick. So that's a new product from Valent. It's got Zidua and it's got Zidua, Callisto, and another one. Clopyralid, maybe? It's another 3-way mix.
So the third one up there on Storin, it starts with a PYR, that's Zidua.
Yep, this pyroxasulfone, that is Zidua. Yep.
Yeah, I knew it meant meso.
Yep, so we've got Callisto,
Yeah.
Zidua, and Dual. That's Storin. The other product that we added this year is a wheat herbicide called Tarzec. So it is basically PowerFlex plus Elevore. So Elevore is going to bring good mare's tail, horseweed, whatever we're calling it these days, control. It's going to bring a little bit of activity on mustards, decent activity on mustards, when they're appropriately sized. And then the PowerFlex piece in my studies, we had great downy growth control, like you would expect with the. Okay. So these first 4 are all Corteva products that are based on Elevore. Okay. And then you can see that the Tarzec was performing similarly to the other products mixed with on the grass. Okay. In my wheat plots at Ashland, I don't have a great mustard population yet, still trying to get there. So not enough to rate. I did put some of these products out on some fairly mature mustards a couple years ago. There's activity there, but the mustards were too big, right? So if you spray them at the appropriate size, you should get decent mustard control. Questions about those two products before we jump into a resistance update? Okay. So this is kind of my scorecard for Palmer Amaranth in terms of herbicide resistance. You guys can see the history that we have there. The yellow box, though, I've highlighted the one that I want to bring your attention to. You guys have probably all seen or talked to neighbors who are experiencing a little bit of reduction in control of dicamba of Palmer Amaranth. Well, Bayer actually are the ones who confirmed this case of resistance from a cornfield under center pivot irrigation in the Colby area. Okay, so kind of western Kansas. So we do now have a confirmed case of resistance in Palmer Amaranth to dicamba in Kansas. Okay. So, just making the job harder. You guys probably aren't super concerned about this Liberty piece. Maybe some of you coming from the east a little bit are paying attention to this one. We've screened a handful of populations where farmers have expressed some concern about Liberty resistance and Palmer Amaranth. We haven't found anything in our studies yet that suggests we have resistance that we should confirm. So this is something to be on the lookout for, is Liberty resistance. The one that I'm really asking folks to be on the lookout for in Palmer Amaranth, though, is this group 15 resistance. So dual, I'm particularly concerned about some of the acetochlor products. Zidua would obviously be a very unfortunate situation to find resistance to that. Yes.
Well, I can tell you more from personal experience regarding dicamba. I do quite a bit of roguing, okay, you know what that word means. And what I have seen in soybean fields that have been sprayed with dicamba, I have seen where the Palmer Amaranth plant was affected, okay? And then the plant sealed that affected stalk off and then shot 2 or 3 more heads.
Yeah, very often what we see with dicamba and 2,4-D when we apply to larger plants, if we're in a commercial field, it'll kind of melt those plants below the canopy and they'll just hang out there below the canopy. The bad part of that is that as we approach fall, they're still probably going to produce seeds, right?
Yeah, but these plants weren't big when that dicamba was applied. I mean, they weren't no 7, 8, 10 inch tall plants.
Yeah.
So my opinion, and this is going back 2 or 3 years, we're past dicamba. We're past it. It's no longer a bet. Now, maybe if you're putting on dicamba at maybe 2 or 3 inch tall weeds, maybe. But anything much bigger no.
Yeah, I mean,
let's tell the truth.
so basically here you go. You've given an extension presentation on weed management in a nutshell. Spray your weeds when they're 3 inches tall. Thank you. Yeah, good. Yep. Okay. So that's the moral of the story, right, guys? But reality is reality. You guys are trying to spray 3-inch weeds and things happen, right? I understand that reality. Water hemp, just so you guys are aware that here in the Palmer part of the world, you're not alone. Your friends back east do have troubles of their own. We are closely monitoring, well, this population of water hemp that we collected south of Topeka. A farmer did bring it to our attention that they were having trouble. They were actually concerned about 2,4-D. Is what they were concerned about. But when we screened it for 2,4-D, dicamba, and Liberty, really the one of most concern is Liberty. So what we've got here, and these are the non-treated plants. Here's the field sample. Here's the susceptible check. We sprayed 2 quarts of Liberty. So here's our susceptible check. Here's our field collected sample. That's 21 days after we sprayed. So you can see it kills them back, right? But it's not killing all of the growing points. And so basically we have those bushes, right, where those lateral buds, those branches take over. So, all right, the third of my most wanted weeds list here, kochia, right? So I've spent most of my time talking about Palmer amaranth because if you've got it, that's your number one weed. We do still have some folks that are not struggling with kochia, but they know they need to be mindful of it, right? So, generally dicamba, atrazine, pretty good kochia products, probably throwing in some Valor and knowing that you're getting some kochia activity there as well. We like flumioxidin. It's a great product for a lot of reasons, but our friends to the north have found resistance to PPO inhibitors in kochia. Okay, so here's some of their data. So these plants were sprayed about 3 inches tall, 2.5 to 3 inches tall, in the greenhouse, and you can see these first 2 rows. That's what I want you to pay attention to. So here's their non-treated check. This family of group 14 herbicides that I kind of consider those post-emergent soybean material, right? Cobra, Flexstar, Ultra Blazer. Those are still working well. The 2 that are particularly concerning, Spartan and Valor. Again, post-activity here, okay? And then Sharpen. They actually went and did we have to do these what we call dose response curves. So we spray everything from like a fraction of a labeled rate to many times the labeled rate to say that we in fact do have resistance. 100 times the labeled rate. They had survivors. Okay. So they did also evaluate for residual activity. Okay, so these are studies with sulfentrazone and Valor. Here's their non-treated checks. You can see here, they've got 6 different populations they've been working with, plus BASF has been working with a handful of other populations. So it's pretty widespread across the state of North Dakota. So what they've got here, here's their untreated different populations. Here's the Spartan. Okay, again, about 3 weeks after they sprayed. And then the one again that I am really kind of interested in here and concerned about is those Valor plants in the back. Okay. So, gonna throw a little bit of data at you. Like this is not just spray and pray data. These are people who actually do science that put this together. One of the kind of responses to those last 3 slides that I showed you guys would be to say, well, I'm spraying atrazine, dicamba, and Valor to control kochia. I'm doing what you're telling me to, Sarah, right? I've got a good chemical program mixing multiple modes of action. Okay, so there's this paper that was recently published where they were trying to figure out and analyze how mixing different herbicide modes of action affects the development of resistance in a population. Okay, caveats here, these scientists were using black grass, which is obviously a grass, but it is Europe's worst weed. Okay, all those small grain production systems over there, this is a cool season grass that is really eating their lunch. Okay, so they're looking at black grass. So here on the bottom of this graph, you can see they made averages, right? 1 herbicide up to 2 herbicides. And then this TSR right here stands for target site resistant. Okay, so when we started with these recommendations about mixing herbicide modes of action, we were mostly focused on target site resistance, right? our sulfonylurea herbicides were in the headline for resistance, glyphosate resistant. Okay, and so mixing herbicides, just going from one product to 2 effective herbicides, does greatly reduce the chance of target site resistance to sulfonylurea herbicide, so ALS inhibiting herbicides, the FOPs, so that's like our Assure types of product, and then the DINs, so that's our select. Okay, that's good news, right? The danger of this is that mixing herbicides basically increases the chances of finding metabolic herbicide resistance. Okay, so some of you guys have probably heard me talk about metabolic herbicide resistance before. It takes longer to develop. It's harder to find because it's sort of like rate creep, right? It's just slowly over time, you select for weeds that can clear the herbicide from the plant faster. Okay, and so basically, here we go on our charts here, we go from 1 herbicide to 2 effective modes of action. And then this right here is a glutathione S transferase, GST. That's the family of enzymes, one of the families of enzymes that's responsible for breaking down herbicides in plants. Okay, and so they're using the amount of this enzyme as a marker for metabolic resistance. Okay, and so on both of these cases, whether they were mixing or rotating, the trend, that upward trend, is similar. Okay, so all of this to say, you guys have, some of you have heard me say this, herbicides are going to be the most efficient and effective way to control weeds for the rest of my career. But we've got to make sure we're supporting. Okay, especially as we move into this area where no-till becomes a very important agronomic tool, right? We've got to find good ways to support our herbicides. So this is a slide some of you guys saw at Cover Your Acres, I do believe. And basically what I did here is I just took pulmonary control in corn as an example. And basically, if you see a herbicide name in those hexagons that is just regular font, that indicates that that herbicide class has no signs of resistance. Okay, so basically we've got Valor free in corn. And that would be few weeks, several days ahead of planting. Okay, so you guys have seen us as weed scientists talk about this before as well, the importance of integrated weed management. I heard a communications expert say last week that that's not a good term to use because the general public doesn't know what that means. But y'all know what that means, right? Integrated weed management. So I would argue that the one we don't talk about enough is prevention, right? I think about just how much I can track around on my boots from one field to the next, and 4-wheeler tires and all the things, right? Prevention. Cultural practices, right? Getting planting date right, anything we can do to encourage good canopy. Obviously, chemical control. Biological control for me is kind of the wild card, right? Like there's lots of activity in this biological space. There's some companies still actively working on bioherbicides. Nothing that's marketable, right? So where we need to probably up our game a little bit is this area of mechanical control. Mechanical control. And that can look like a lot of different things, right? Doesn't have to be tillage. If we think very futuristically, it might look like, we hear folks talking about laser weeders, right? That's a few iterations out. One of the groups, I worked with, Dr. Jha, who is our precision ag guru, to work with the company that has what they call directed energy, so it's not quite as high level of energy as a laser beam, but they're taking light and of certain wavelengths and focusing it, and it looks like we can reduce weed seed germination and even kill weeds that are already up. Okay, so, the proposal that we put in was to try to scale this up to something that could be put on a toolbar and actually like used in the field instead of on a bench in a laboratory. So I think we're gonna see movement in this space, right? One of the places that I often end up talking about tillage for weed control is tumbleweed grass. How many of you guys have tumbleweed grass creeping in on you around field edges? Yeah, a couple of you guys. So folks that have tumbleweed grass generally are very unhappy with the situation, right? It's actually a native plant, which means it's going to be a challenge to control because it belongs here. It was here before we were, right? It has these really flat folded leaves, so not a lot of leaf surface there to get herbicide in. And then it has these panicles that will break off and tumble around, right? So folks that have it, some folks have it in their yards, right? And it's always interesting to talk to the farm wife. It's like, oh, that thing is that collects at my front door, right? A lot of folks that I talk to kind of blame it on creeping in from the road ditches though, right? It'll tend to start at the edge of the field and kind of work its way in. So it's not a new problem, been around a while. These are some old data approaching 25 years old, oh my word. Data here that come out of K-State. They looked at seedling control in the field both 6 weeks after they sprayed and at harvest. And basically the long and the short of the story is that when we spray seedling tumbleweed grass, it's not too hard to control with our grass herbicides or with glyphosate. Okay, as long as it's a seedling. But when we try to control established plants, this is the same paper, they got basically, herbicide failures when they did that. So they looked at a couple rates of glyphosate, post, select, assure. Okay. Now there's been some work on this in the turfgrass space. So they have some different opportunities, also different challenges than we do. So here we're looking either 4 or 8 weeks after they sprayed, and then they came back a year later. One of the things that I think is important to take away from this thesis is that there is a little bit of a season effect. Okay, so they're looking at cover. So this is sort of the inverse of how I typically show a graph, right? When I show a graph, I usually have control going up the side. This is cover. So in this case, we want a small bar. Small is better. Okay, so the gold bars here consistently have shorter bars than the other two. So that's telling me that there could be some advantages of trying to spray this grass in the spring before it has time to get those roots established, right? Perennial weed control 101. Hit it while it's weak. Then these are some data that have come out of Hayes more recently. So Augustina Bohr has been managing this long-term no-till site at Hayes. And as you might expect, they were having trouble with tumbleweed grass in those no-till plots. Okay, and so they had, they had no-till, strategic till, and then they had a reduced till system. And then this is a total weed count. It was primarily tumbleweed grass, also some prairie cup grass, some 3-on, and some kochia in that mix, but it was primarily windmill grass. So this is wheat fallow, wheat sorghum fallow, and continuous wheat. Okay. And so the thing I want you guys to see is that in their strategic tillage and their reduced tillage, they saw a significant reduction in tumbleweed grass control. Okay. The data that I didn't pull from this study, because it's kind of a story for another day, is that they were also measuring all of these soil health indicators. And the statistics between the no-till and the strategic till for the soil health indicators were basically non-existent. The soil health indicators were very, very simple. Okay, there were a few that were statistically different, but most of them were the same. So we wanted to take a look at tumbleweed millgrass control, combining this idea of a spring application during fallow with strategic tillage. Okay, so we ran sweeps in late April. And we came back in and we used Roundup, Select, Callisto. There's evidence out of the turf world that Callisto could be a possible herbicide here. Impact. And then Sinnate, which is basically Impact plus Liberty. Okay. We also had a few treatments that had Remedy in them, just to see, because again, turf world, non-crop world, there's some evidence that will increase activity. We're not going to look at those data today, though. The other thing I'll say before we look at the data is that this Sinnate treatment, AMFAC is pursuing a label for tumbleweed millgrass control in corn for Sinnate. Okay, so you're going to see it's not life-changing, but it is an in-crop labeled option. Okay. So here's the data, here's our results. Basically, the short story here is that clethodim provided the most consistent control. So this is a month after, 8 weeks after, and then 12 weeks after. We did see a reduction with clethodim. Also, we saw some reductions with Sinnate. Okay, so again, not anything to get super excited about, but definitely better than the Roundup treatment there. Okay. The other thing that is important to say, I did not put my stars on this chart, but each of the tillage treatments resulted in greater tumbleweed millgrass control, right? So you disturb that root system, we gave it some time to get reestablished, and then we hit it again, right? So we messed it up right after coming out of winter, and then we messed it up again with the herbicides. And so we did see greater control when we combined strategic tillage with our herbicide application. Okay, here's looking at it just a little bit differently, comparing the no-till and the sweet plow treatments. So Select performed similarly in both studies, but glyphosate, Impact, and Sinnate both had considerably more control when we applied them after a pass with a sweet plow. Okay, so again, perennial weed control 101. Do what you can to reduce the reserves coming from the roots and then hit it with some herbicide. Okay, just some photos so you guys can start to see the Select no-till, Select sweet plow, and then Sinnate with the sweet plow. Here's the margin right there, the border. You can see what we were dealing with in our non-treated strips. The last thing I want to leave you guys with today, should have plenty of time for some questions here as well. This is a study. They're just starting to really analyze and publish this data. So John Holman out of Garden City is the lead on this study, but they've got it at Garden and they've got it at Tribune. The data that I'm going to show you in just a minute come from Tribune. And basically, it's that same wheat, sorghum, fallow type of rotation. And here's their tillage treatments. They have no-till. They have 2 treatments that are single tillage events. So one tillage during the summer, right before they drill their wheat. And then one tillage pass right after wheat harvest. Okay, so or not, one or the other there. And then they have a couple of treatments. One is 2 tillage passes during fallow, and the other is 1 during fallow and 1 right after wheat. Okay, so those are the treatments we have there. Again, 2 locations. We're gonna focus on the Tribune location. If you're interested in seeing John's paper, you can use your phone and take a picture of that QR code and open the link and get to the paper there. So basically, we're gonna step through 4 data tables here. This first data table is looking at wheat yield in the single tillage operation. Okay, so they did see statistically greater wheat yields in the no-till treatments compared to the single yield treatments. I'll let you guys decide on your farms. You know, it is 2 bushels an acre worth the trade-off for the weed control that they might have been doing. Right, that's where farming becomes an art, right? Table 2, now we're looking at the grain sorghum yields. Okay, so this is, again, a rotation here is wheat, sorghum, fallow. So grain sorghum yields, again, the no-till was statistically greater than the single tillage treatments. Numerically, we have a little bit bigger differences there compared to the wheat. And then tables 3 and 4 here, now we're looking at the wheat yield. And we've got no-till, we've got the 1 pass during fallow, 2 passes during fallow, 1 pass after wheat, and then 1 pass in fallow and 1 pass after wheat. So now we've got all of those different tillage treatments that we looked at just a second ago. Basically, guys, no differences in wheat yield among those 5 treatments. Okay. If we come down here and look at the grain sorghum yields, we did see reduced grain sorghum yields when they worked the ground after wheat harvest. Okay. But when they were working the ground in the fallow phase, the milo yields were consistent for the no-till. Okay, so as we start to think about the trade-off between, you know, the weed control we get from tillage and the agronomic benefits from no-till, right? We're starting to get some data here coming out of Western Kansas to show what some of those trade-offs are specifically. Okay. I'm biased because I'm the weed scientist in the room, but there's gonna be times where if you're dealing with a sticky weed management situation, that tillage is probably gonna save you in the long run. Okay, it's strategic, it's not every year, right? Basically, we're using tillage as like a reset button. Okay, because think about the weeds we're going after here. We're going after Palmer, right? Kochia, even windmill grass, all of those are gonna thrive in that no-till environment where the seeds stay on the surface. You bury those babies once every 5 or 10 years, and you're gonna lose enough germination, right? Gotta keep them buried for a while. If you continuously till every year, you're back on that cycle where you're just flipping the seeds up to germinate, okay? So take home messages. Unfortunately, few new products, lots of new regulations. Okay. I am working with a couple of products in my herbicide evaluation trials, guys, that they've been saying, you know, late next year, mid next year for a couple of years now. All the nonsense going on with the courts and the EPA is slowing down those new registrations. Okay, so we're optimistic, they're in the pipeline. But I'll tell you, if you're looking for a silver bullet, it's another tool, but it's not a miracle. Okay. So just friendly reminder to be proactive about herbicide resistance management on your farm. And then let's start looking hard at strategic tillage. Again, I know that in a lot of places, till is literally a 4-letter word as well as figuratively. But each of you are the experts on your farm, and you know your trade-offs and you know your economics. I think there's probably gonna be more and more cases where we need to start looking hard at that as an important tool. Okay? How are we on time, Sandra?
We're good. So we
Okay.
have like 10 minutes for questions.
Questions, conversation, comments? Yes, sir.
Okay, now. All right, now you've got those color coded and
Yep.
I was trying to look up some stuff in my weed book. So, that a little bit. again.
Yep. So I didn't spend as long on this slide as I have in other situations. So basically, these colors, they code back to your take action charts. Right? So if you have, which we've been having issues with our HR folks on the take action side. So the charts have been approved. If you go to commodity, they'll be there, commodity classic. But I will try to get some and get them around to the offices as an aside. But these colors go back to the different color code for the group, herbicide groups on the take action chart. Okay, and so I broke them down thinking about before weed emergence and after weed emergence. Okay, if I drew a line through the product, that indicates that we have confirmed resistance to that herbicide in Kansas. Okay. If I, let's see here, if I underlined it, that is an indicator that someone else has confirmed resistance to that product. So for example, dual, we know that there are Palmer amaranth populations in Arkansas that have confirmed resistance to dual. Which, by the way, our new weed science friend, Dr. Kalami, worked with a bunch of those populations. So he's well versed in Palmer amaranth resistance to group 15s. The white indicates that there is confirmed resistance at another application time or another herbicide in that same family. Okay. So basically, if we look here, we've got this one herbicide family of the group 14s, and then we've got that same herbicide family on the pre-emergent side. As far as effective products and forward. So that's how I broke that down. I'm just trying to think of a way to visualize what's working and what's not. Okay. The other thing that I think this chart helps us to visualize, if we look, let's take the group 15s, because this is a question I get from time to time. There's different herbicide families within group 15. Right, so we've spent a lot of time trying to train you guys to know what the numbers are of herbicide labels, right, group 15. But that indicates where those herbicides work in the plants. We also, as weed nerds that like to play organic chemists on TV, right? We know that there are different families within the group 15s, and so those families basically mean that they have, within the family, they have similar key building blocks. So some of you guys have heard me use this example of my boys and their Legos, right? I can give them both a stack of Legos, and both of their outcomes, whatever they build, can have the blue 4-peg square in it, right? And so they have that piece in common, but the overall construction, right? Levi's probably gonna build a house and Caleb's gonna build a gun. So, that piece, that key element is how we break them down into families. Now, the reason I think we're gonna start hearing more about this is because the enzymes that break down herbicides in plants are looking for that key element. And that key element is going to be present within the family, but it also could be present across families or across groups as well. Okay, a lot of times it's what we call a hydroxyl group, which just oxygen and hydrogen, special carbon at a particular place. Right? So we're gonna start talking more, unfortunately, because you guys don't have enough to do, we're gonna start talking more organic chemistry probably as we talk about the metabolic herbicide resistance and why certain things work. Okay.
So, pre-merge.
Yep.
So that's about it. You've got the word there, that's not the chemical in Zuja, is it?
No, that is the family name. So there's two main families of group 15s, isoxazolines and chloroacetamides. And so the question I get is, should I rotate from metolachlor from dual to harness? And I say, well, you'd be better off to rotate Zidua and dual. Does that make sense? Because even though they're still going after the same very long chain fatty acid inhibiting enzymes and the coleoptile of the grass, they have different chemical structure. Does that make sense?
So. There doesn't appear to be any resistance to Zuja.
Right, we have not seen any indication. Yes. No, he said yes. The same time.
Some areas of the country, there is, aspect.
Yes, we do have resistance to dual.
And now, it's an outlook for basically the same.
They have this very similar chemical structure. That key element of the herbicide is the same in those three.
But
Not as much as you go. Yeah, that's the.
so basically what you're saying is that there's really only maybe a couple of trees that are actually effective.
So that's a story for another day to some extent, because I think there's value in continuing to use dual in our programs, right? At a price point, we're still gonna get maybe 50% suppression of our Palmer. We're gonna bring good grass, right? So we shouldn't discount the work that dual is doing, right? It's kind of that tired old grass horse. I don't have these in other people. Okay. But we need to help it out. We need to put that new horse out of the barn next to it so that we can continue to get good activity. Yep.
So they're
Yep.
basically at group 14 then.
Yeah, so and really these are post-emergence to weeds, right? We can't use any of those post to corn, right?
Got it.
Post-emergence to weeds, so Reviton, Sharpen, and Valor, we spray those over the top of our corn, we're gonna get probably better corn control than we would get.
So those need to be sprayed,
Right, those are burned, self-control,
Great.
first weeds, yep. Yep,
Well, how
so is there a
word this, but if you're using one kind of chemical and your neighbors use another, how much will they cross from field to field or from area to area?
the pig, how much will the pigweeds cross?
Yeah.
You know, that's a really good question. We know that Palmer amaranth pollen can travel a long distance. Miles, right? And so it's likely that we do see mixing, right, of those populations. And so that's one of the reasons why when I do extension talks, I really ask you guys to communicate with me when you find resistant populations, because it's not just your problem, right? That pollen is gonna go and become everybody else's problem too. So yeah, it's a community effort, right? To make sure that we keep this under control. So yeah, that's a really good question.
So is there a post-emerge in corn that you can put on corn that would stop palmer that hasn't come up?
Yeah, so we're looking at, in the state of Kansas, we haven't confirmed Liberty to Palmer Amaranth yet.
But that's not a residual.
It's not a residual, no.
So is there a residual?
So the residuals that we can spray over the top of corn would be atrazine, dual, harness, outlook, and zidua, and callisto.
So where are those on your hexagon?
So we've got atrazine, zidua, dual, harness, outlook, and callisto.
But Callisto is in white, so that means there's,
So that means that we have confirmed resistance to callisto post to Palmer amaranth, but not pre-emergence to Palmer. So very often what we find is that we see resistance to the post-emergence applications before we see resistance to the pre-emergence applications. Same story with atrazine here.
so Callisto is mesotrione.
Yes, yep. So lots of different types of callisto out there.